When it comes to discussing some of the most luxurious Cadillacs of all time, it's kind of hard to pick ones that stand out because Cadillac had myriad offerings that were extremely luxurious, particularly back, and I'll call it the true classic car era of the pre-war time frame. However, by the mid-1960s, Cadillac was still producing beautifully glamorous automobiles. And while I am a huge fan, as viewers know of this channel, of the 1967 Eldorado, I have to say that the 1965 Fleetwood series is also extremely elegant. And this recent Fleetwood 60 special that I saw at a local car show was just spectacular. And notice the blue ribbon on its windshield. This is, by the way, at the Eyes on Design car show held at the Edsel Ford House in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, every year on Father's Day. So make sure that you make it an event for your family. But let's talk about this 1965 Cadillac in more detail. Now, the first thing to note about the 65 Cadillac is that it was based on an all-new platform for 1965. The previous generation of General Motors full-size cars ran from 1961 to 1964. This generation would run from 1965 to 1970. And the Fleetwood would become larger overall. I should say the Fleetwood series. And this Fleetwood 60 Special measures 227.5 inches long and rode atop a, for the first time, exclusive wheelbase. More specifically, the Fleetwood 60 Special and Fleetwood Brougham rode atop a 133-inch wheelbase compared to the DeVille and Calais series 129.5-inch wheelbase. So you not only got more length when you upgraded to the Fleetwood, you got more presence, let's say, as well. And these cars certainly had presence. The 1965 Cadillac marked the first of the stacked headlamp Cadillacs, and this was a bit of a trend that was happening at General Motors as well as Ford. Pontiac had begun its stacked headlamp trend in 1963. It would take Cadillac a few more years until 1965 to come out with its version of the stacked headlamp vehicles. And they would only last for a few model years. By 1969, they were gone. But I think that the 65 Cadillac is one of the prettiest Cadillacs of all time, and it represented a change in styling philosophy from the previous models. First of all, you notice that there's no pronounced skeg line on the lowers like there was on the 61 to 62 Cadillac, and the fins are even toned down more versus the 63 and 64 Cadillac out back, and we're going to take a look in more detail in a second. And you also have these extremely clean body sides. This convex surface that really doesn't have all that much happening on the body side. It's just simple, clean, and elegant. You have a full wall-to-wall grille, of course, up here, emphasizing the width of the vehicle, helping make it look wider because those stacked headlamps could give it a narrower look up front, but with a car that's almost 80 inches wide and this full wall-to-wall grille, that is not a problem. And of course, you've got the Cadillac standard, let's call it hood design here, with the so-called catwalk, or that lower section in between the fender peak and the shoulder on the hood on either side. And this raised section with the shoulders in the middle of the hood, something that would continue on Cadillacs for many, many years, all the way through the 1990s even on the Seville and the Eldorado. One other thing to point out up front here is that beautiful cornering lamp that is just in front of the front wheel. And the cornering lamp was actually an invention that was introduced by Cadillac in 1962, and they just beautifully integrated it into the overall design theme here. Notice that it has a grille almost like the front of the vehicle, and I think it looks very tasteful, along with that wheel arch that's integrated into the molding that comes off of the front of the car and then heads downward aft of the wheel. Now, as we transition to the side profile of this car, notice it has this very distinctive Cadillac formal style roofline. You have a relatively upright windshield and kind of a symmetrically upright backlight. And that backlight being so upright was a Cadillac hallmark that persisted even during this period. This was a period when many other marques were going through a transition in their styling to add fastback roof lines. And didn't matter if you got a two-door, four-door, whatever Cadillac of this era, there was no fastback design. They always had a pretty stiff C-pillar to them. And I think that was something that the designers felt gave them this elegant appeal. And it dated all the way back to the Coach days when you wanted that kind of vertical style C-pillar to disguise who was riding around in the rear. Notice that this body side, again, as I mentioned, is clean. Must be a designer's car, or somebody who ordered it wanted to be a designer, because there's no door edge guards, which would be very typical for a Cadillac of this era. And there's no body side molding either, which would also be extremely typical. Instead, this car is unadorned by the door edge guards, the body side molding. And because it's a 60 Special and not a Brougham, it doesn't have the padded top on it. The Broughams would come standard with a padded top and a little script that would say Brougham on the C-pillar, in addition to the wreath and crest. But again, just an overall elegant design, relatively flat fenders, relatively flat quarters, which normally I don't think work on vehicles, but for some reason they work just elegantly and beautifully here. As we rotate around to the rear of the car, look at how simple and elegant this body side is, particularly that quarter panel. This is almost a no-line quarter panel. It's just a smooth, unbroken style surface with some convexity to it. And of course, it has the peak for the quarter. There is a crease that runs down the bottom side of the car where it tucks in toward the rocker. And that's almost like this drag section, very Ford-esque. You could almost have a template. Imagine this template dragging itself, or having somebody drag it across the clay in a clay model, making the same shape all the way down the side of the car. And it's a bit interesting that I mentioned that Ford technique that you'll see on many Ford cars of the drag section rocker, because the 65 Cadillac design here was really inspired by the 1961 Continental. And that's why you see these relatively unadorned body sides that are relatively flat and don't have creases, and flat quarters and flat fenders, because this car was a response to that. And the 61 Continental, I think, is a beautiful vehicle. This Fleetwood is perhaps even a bit more spectacular. And notice that Cadillac has kind of symmetrical fins, top and the bottom here, but they're not canted outward to any degree. They're just perfectly vertical all the way straight up and down. And the tail lamps, as well as the reverse lamps, are encompassed in that chrome section that adorns basically the entire rear of the quarter panel. And as we rotate around to the dead-on rear view here, notice that the front, and in particular the style of the grille, is repeated here in the horizontal theme that you see in the detailing that surrounds the license plate. Just an overall great way to tie the front to the back, which is something that designers would often try to do. And the horizontal details in this car really help visually slim it from the rear. Notice that your eye picks up the black painted surface of the deck lid and the upper portion of the quarter panel, but because of the significant amount of chrome and the visual bedizened elements, I guess I'll call them, to the rear of the vehicle, your eye kind of visually slims down the car because it only picks up the black paint versus the rest that is chrome mostly, and of course the license plate. So this car doesn't have much of a taper to the rear or a taper to the front, frankly, which was something that Bill Mitchell, the General Motors styling vice president, loved on many cars. But because this doesn't have it, it needs something else to minimize the heft visually in the rear, and I think this does it rather successfully. Let's zoom in now on one of these quarter panel end caps, I guess I'll call them. You can see here that they're separate from the bumper. Ideally, the designers, I'm sure, would want it to be all one piece and integrated, but for cost reasons and for likely assembly reasons, it was made into multiple pieces. But that just beautifully integrates the lights, including the reverse lights here. And I want to point out a very fine detail that many people may not know. Notice the exposed screws here that are enabling access to the lamps. During this time frame, Cadillac did not provide access from the trunk area to change out the bulbs on the tail lamps. So here you would just take these two screws off and you'd remove the lens and you'd change the bulb. Well, one of the designers for the 1966 Cadillac didn't like the look of the exposed screws, and so he eliminated them from the design in 1966. And as a result, there is not an easy way to change the bulb on the rear of the car. You can't reach in through the trunk, and there's no way to change it from the front of the car. You either have to have extremely small hands and kind of wiggle your way up there in between the bumper and the quarter panel to change the bulb, or remove the bumper to change the bulb on the 1966 Cadillacs. That 1 year only, and it was because the designer did not want to show those exposed screw heads anymore. Now, as we transition to the interior of these vehicles, unfortunately, the windows on this car were up, so I couldn't get any great shots of the interior, so I have to show some stock photos here. But this is a Brougham interior, and first of all, the kind of simple elegance that this 65 Cadillac interior has just exemplifies the overall design philosophy, and I think creates this harmonious interior and exterior because the interior is not overwrought. It's actually very simple and elegant, just like the exterior. There are some interesting elements, though. Take a look at the driver's door control panel and all the switches that you can see there. That is a ridiculous number of switches, and that's because not only are there power windows, 4 per each side, there's also power vent windows, another 4 switches for the power vent windows both front and rear. And then you have the door lockout switch as well. It's just an amazing amount of switches on these vehicles. And here's a DeVille series, a Coupe DeVille. I couldn't find a picture of a Fleetwood that did what I wanted, or at least showed what I wanted. But I wanted to show here, notice how the IP wraps into the door, and there's this continuous shape and forms from the IP into the door, both the top pad as well as that chrome spear or that bright work that makes its way around the corner of the IP and onto the door. Extremely elegant overall theme. In fact, there are multiple pieces of bright work that continue from the IP over to the door. Remember, this was a time frame when, more often than not, the IP was almost viewed as a separate piece and the door panels were separate, but Cadillac was starting to integrate them and just did a fantastic job here. This was also the early years of automatic climate control for your Cadillac. Cadillac introduced automatic climate control in 1964. I believe they were first to market, certainly first of the domestics. And they had a 1-year only exclusive on automatic climate control before other divisions could offer it, beginning with the 1965 model year. And as we transition back to a Fleetwood, I did want to just show the rear seat to at least let the viewer see how beautiful the detailing was in the interior of these. That is real wood veneer on the doors and on the seat back. And it's just a beautiful, tasteful accent to the clean and simple design of this interior. And it's just fantastic. Unfortunately, a few years later, Cadillac would start trimming the cost out of their interiors, and they would really start to go downhill, I would say, beginning 1968 model year, maybe a little bit before that. But in 1965, you still got the full Cadillac in your interior. It's actually kind of sad to see what the interiors became, particularly in the early 1970s, like the 1971, 2, and 3 Cadillac interiors, to me, are just nothing compared to what you see in the photo here. And that leaves us with what was powering this big vehicle under hood. Well, this represented the second model year for Cadillac's 429 cubic inch V8 that made 340 gross horsepower. It was introduced in 1964, and its final year would be 1967 before in 1968, Cadillac would come out with its all-new 472 cubic inch V8. These 429s are relatively good engines. They are smooth and they're, I would say, powerful for what they are. They're extremely smooth and silent runners. I have to say I prefer the 472-500 over the 429, but that's not to say that the 429 is a bad engine. It's just that 472 and 500 is even smoother and has more power under hood, so I just tend to like it a little bit better. And these 429s, they did have some oil pump issues. Sometimes the oil pump, if the oil weren't changed as frequently as it should have been, would unnaturally wear the front cover out on these V8s, and then you'd lose oil pressure. So that is one thing to look out for if you have a Cadillac with this 429. Just make sure it's building good oil pressure and make sure you keep the oil changed and clean. And your 429 should last quite some time. I've had these engines in my Cadillacs, and they haven't really given me any problems at all, nor have the 472s and 500s of the latter years. So what do you think about this 1965 Cadillac? Is this the peak of Cadillac, or was there something else that was the peak? Was it earlier? Was it later? Put a comment in the comment section. But for my money, I have to say this 65 Fleetwood is just a drop-dead knockout vehicle. I would love to own one of these. But, you know, you can only have so many cars at one point in time, and these are rare. I'd have to have one without the vinyl roof, too, just like this. So that's, well, even more rare. In any case, hope you enjoyed this. Put a comment in the comment section. Thanks for watching.